one of the most essential problems that a particular Zen master from the older times of the tradition addresses is that it never occurs to ordinary people to control your own mind. So it's both something we should become aware of more and a skill that likewise needs to be trained, because mind control is not actually an innate ability that unawakened beings simply have in their nature. So it never really crosses people's minds that they could actually control their own thinking. And sure, we think about things and we have assignments and goals to reach, and we follow those thoughts and we follow those projects through. We have to focus, we have to think. But really, how much control do we actually have? Well, we get distracted all the time. That's a completely different world. It's the intellectual world, and it's discursive. So the average person never thinks about interrupting the way their mind works. They just go wherever their thoughts lead them. They aren't standing outside the process. They're completely consumed by it. So all of us, we're just kind of drowning in our own minds. And when people first try meditation, they get this unusual instruction to sit still and watch their thoughts. And suddenly it hits them. It occurs to them how stubborn their mind really is. Some people who try breath meditation for the first time, they can't even count 10 breaths. They will get distracted after a few, 3, 4, 5 breaths. It simply refuses to sit, to stay where it needs to stay. And there's a strange sense of self-consciousness about it. You feel like you're just playing make-believe. And you close your eyes and try to focus on your breath. But your mind has never been asked to do this. It's like an unruly kitten. You call it over, but it ignores you. It wanders off, it gets distracted, and it's just not very interested in listening. But it has interests. It's all over the place. And every now and then it might notice you for a few seconds and crawl up to you and be really interested. And then it gets distracted by something else. And people just live with this essentially noise, mind noise. We have this. It doesn't matter how smart people are. This is a fundamental problem. You know, some people are very intelligent and can follow a specific train of thought for quite a while. They might get lost in a book or some problem solving, but it's just a type of sensory bait that hooks the brain. These things that we get lost in, books and movies, we can focus on them. And what tends to happen is that we focus so much, but without cognizance. And what this is, in fact, is a form of hypnosis, where we are able to focus on some things, like a movie or some problem that we're trying to solve, but we get absolutely enveloped by it. And this is hypnosis. You get hypnotized by the sensory input. And it's not cognizant because you've lost awareness, right? When people say that you lose yourself in an activity, what's happening is you are losing yourself. You're losing your sense of self. You're losing your self-awareness. Only the thing that exists is that activity or the movie, right? The only thing that exists for you when you're watching a movie is the characters and the story, and you you forget yourself. You disappear. The couch disappears, the living room, you disappear. You just become the movie. That's hypnosis. It's concentration in the negative form without awareness. It could be a game. It could be a sport. I mean, it could be a game that you're playing. It could be a game you're watching on TV, a hockey match. It captures your attention, and it happens constantly. We walk down the street. We notice a building. It looks kind of strange, but we don't realize how strange it might be, or what the sunset looks like, how strange the colors really are, because we're just entranced by it. And that's really the point where you need to question, wait, is this even real? Because you see really strange things all the time, unusual things, and we get used to it. And that's why you don't question it in your dreams. In the dreams, especially, things are very strange. You don't question it because you never question it. But that needs to be a habit. Especially when we're having a conversation with people, it's incredibly easy to lose your self-awareness. You get absorbed in the other person, what they're saying, what they look like. The only thing you're concerned about maybe is sometimes your body language. But you don't really know what's going on. You know what they're talking about, but do you really know why you're there, or what you're doing, what day of the week it is? Like, this kind of awareness we lose. And that's why in our dreams, we will talk to people that we think we know, but we don't. We'll be in a place that we think we're familiar with, but we're not actually familiar with that place. We've never been there, but we don't realize because we never question things like this. So it isn't really a choice. This requires something outside of yourself. For us to feel, I just mean to feel, not for the awareness, but to feel like we have our attention on something and we feel secure. Because without the stimulation, the outside stimulation, we get lost. I'll get into that in a second. Because otherwise, people generally, we have little idea how to handle silence or the lack of stimulation because of this constant distraction by stimulation, especially in the modern times where we have stimulants or external stimuli everywhere. We don't live in villages and huts anymore in the forest. We live in the city now, and we have electronics and technology everywhere. There is just endless things to get distracted by. So we're so used to it. And the mind naturally, the ordinary mind loves stimulation. It will feed constantly and more these through a mechanical process of impressions that it likes, that are pleasing. And those impressions will just grow in your mind, and you get addicted to them, to sights, to feelings, to TV, to colors, activities. And we're at the point where it feels awful to us. It is stark and daunting to just sit in silence, to be aware that nothing is going on. And that's often a trigger for anxiety attacks, is someone suddenly realizes spontaneously there's this actually awakening that goes on in your consciousness where you realize what's going on. You realize you're here in this place right now doing this thing. And then all of a sudden your mind starts firing off those neurotransmitters, and that's triggering your panic attack. It could be at work or somewhere. You realize, oh my God, I'm doing this thing right now. In fact, I'm trapped here at work. I can't actually move from this counter for the next hour. And then people get an anxiety attack from that. Or, oh my God, I'm talking to this person I've never met before. This is actually really strained. And then that, again, anxiety attack. Or other times we could be alone and we feel anxious. If we're in a quiet room, nothing going on. And of course, so people's only experience when there is nothing to feed on, there are no impressions that the mind is receiving, that state of, not even a good state of emptiness, but that void, our only experience is anxiety, restlessness. We want to do something, we want to pursue some other activity, and which is essentially boredom. But also the thing we don't realize is that this is a trap that we're always stuck in. Sometimes people do realize that this is like a perpetual mechanical motion. It's a perpetual motion of some sort. It is technically mechanical. I may not come to that realization, but they realize that this is an endless pursuit. Your mind is naturally geared toward feeding on different kinds of stimuli. And so when people lose their job, for instance, some people, after 10 or 15 years, they've lost their job, and after some years they can't afford to go out, right? Or maybe even sooner than that, especially in a place like this city where I live. It would only take a matter of weeks before you realize that you can't go out as much as you used to, and you're barely affording the basic things like your food. But if you have the basic things covered, but you can't afford to go out and socialize, or you can't even afford Netflix or something, then day after day, you wake up to a total lack of structure, because there's no school, no work, everything is up to you, and we just turn to watching TV or sleeping in. And it becomes a nightmare for some people. It becomes just depressing for a lot. I mean, there are people who've won the lottery. There was at least one guy I've heard about who, I guess he won the lottery. It was, I don't know how many millions of dollars it was. And he just got a job mowing lawns soon after that. I'm not sure how long it took to spend all the money or what he did with it, but he got bored. So he didn't have to get a job for a while, but he did get one mowing lawns. He was bored. So these people will grab any job basically just to have a schedule again. And this is a pretty shaky way to live when you are at the mercy of your untamed mind. You might think you're disciplined, but we only manage ourselves because we're just distracted by external things. It's that structure, that outside structure and routine and activities that are keeping us together. We say to ourselves, if we follow this, well, we don't say to ourselves, but we know that if we follow these structures, then we'll be okay. But without them, we're completely lost. We think there's nothing. When you're not doing anything, there is nothing. When you're not perceiving anything in an activity, then what is there to perceive? And the ordinary person says nothing. There's nothing there. It's empty. You have to fill that void. You have to. But there are rare people who seem to be natural at this, though. Natural at living low stimulation or low stimuli lives. And old people are kind of like this, where they can sit on a porch all evening or all day, or sit at home all day reading. It's partially due to their energy levels being lower, so they don't want to do a lot of stuff. But these are people who love going into the woods, and they can just sit and think, and sometimes not even think. They just admire the scenery and the fresh air. Thoreau was likely one of these naturals. He wrote about sitting on his porch for hours, reflecting on this unusual mental state that it was hard for him to describe. And, you would wonder if he was touching on something like the first jhana, this state of kind of serenity and perhaps equanimity, and with little to no thoughts. And the jhana is a super normal state where the mind stops its perpetual motion. It really does stop that perpetual motion, because there's a concentration there that you have to place to get to the jhana. And at that point, you have to stop thinking to get there. You have to stop the movement of the mind. You have to make it still, because the inferior mind is the one that's moving. When that stills, the conscious mind, which is another aspect, a higher aspect, is able to shine forth. That's what's really behind the stillness and behind the chatter. So the mind stops grinding away. There is something thereafter. So you have to stop thinking and stop worrying and being anxious. Those are all polarized states, and they have movement. They have vibration. When those vibrations subside, your real consciousness finally engages. It's that concentration with the cognizance or the awareness. That is real. That is a real active, engaged mind. But there's no thinking involved in this. And so it's not lost in the past or the future. Most people live their whole lives without a glimpse of this. Very unfortunately, like without a glimpse of the first jhana. Thoreau found something in solitude, even if he didn't have the words for it. He was pretty critical of others for not being able to do this, or not being able to find serenity in stillness and quietude. He said most people live lives of quiet desperation. He noticed that when people are constantly active, it's much of the time it's not meaningful. He compared it to a nervous twitch. He saw that the constant busyness was just a lack of control. But he was self-taught. He was a self-taught contemplative. And he was a rare case. So this is exactly what monks are trained to do, because you have teachers and examples of this everywhere. You can become very good at it. No matter how well Thoreau did, he was still an amateur. And an amateur is just someone who loves their craft. So he loved this idea, but he wasn't a professional. And still, even as an amateur, he seemed amazing to everyone else. So that shows how wild and untrained our minds usually are. Like, we are at a very crude, instinctual level. So the Buddha called this the ordinary, uninstructed worldling. It refers to people who have no idea that a contemplative mind is even possible. And when we use that word contemplative, it doesn't mean that you're contemplating and thinking. It means that your mind is in deep serenity and stillness, which is a form of contemplation. It's that supernormal contemplation where your consciousness, not the conditioned or the subconsciousness, but your true consciousness is the thing that is active and contemplating. It's the only thing that needs to be busy. And when it's busy, it's just focused. And it's not thinking, it just knows things. That's its own form of thinking. And even when we use words like meditation, some people think that it could include thinking deeply about a topic, contemplating deeply and intellectualizing. But this isn't real meditation. The basic starting point, for example, shamatha, or stillness, is a total mystery to most people. Many people try mindfulness now, which is great. It forces you to look into your own mind, and it's like hitting a reset and facing that chaos is pretty shocking. People often come to these long retreats that schools and teachers will hold, and the majority of them leave by the third day. And some monks have this rule that you can't join a 10-day retreat unless you've have some experience. You've done 5 days or a week at first, because it's a very it's too boring and too much to handle and too monotonous to be plunged into total meditation for so many days, and people can't even sustain that meditation. It's going to be boring for them. They're going to be distracted constantly. It's really frustrating and fatiguing, because for the mind, like, you get really tired. It tires you to sit there. Your brain gets stressed because you're not good at it. You're not used to it. So it's a fight. You're fighting with your own mind at that point. This doesn't make sense. It's like being stuck in an elevator for a week. It's not supposed to be that painful, though. So you have to build up to it. You have to get used to it. That's why mindfulness is a preliminary exercise. It doesn't have to be the meditation. Mindfulness is something you should be training or engaging and practicing on a moment-to-moment basis. It's just being aware and present and not thinking, because that requires that you activate your consciousness to perceive the now. It should be an ongoing natural state. That's how you can get into meditation. That's the entranceway, or it's like a bridge. There was a psychology professor from UBC. He studied mindfulness and he really wanted to join. He wanted to do a 10-day retreat at this monastery a few hours up north. But he was told that he wasn't ready, and he insisted, based on his academic background, that he'd be a good candidate. And so he came, and he tried it. He left on the 4th day. So he discovered, how hard it was. He would stand and look at various random things, like the woodshed, where they just keep their firewood, just staring at it, looking at it, desperate for anything to hold on to, some kind of stimulation or point of concentration. So academic types are not suited for this. This is not an intellectual or mental work. It's a conscious work. Someone who doesn't read much, someone who's not intellectual or complicated, a simple person might actually have an easier time doing this. But intellectuals have to, they have to drop that constant mental chatter. So it's not necessarily beneficial to be a philosophical person. They have this addiction, right? They love books and ideas, and as long as they have them, as long as they have something to think about and contemplate and solve or analyze or philosophize about, then they're fine. But if you take that mental stimulation away, right, and I think the Greek philosophers, maybe down the road, they succumb to this too. Maybe not initially, but hundreds of years down the road into the practice of philosophy, they too became addicted to thinking. It's not necessarily a better form or a higher form of stimulation. And maybe it is compared to crude sensory things, physical things, right? Like eating or watching movies. But there's no stillness in it. So, it's someone who needs a snack during the day, or someone who can't turn off the radio. And people leave the TV on, leave the radio on all night. They can't handle that silence. It's like a drug. So we stay busy all the time. That's how we face our existence. And so when we meditate, we have to settle the restlessness. But is it any different than taking a pill to feel content? Because for some people, a pill is their only hope. You're not going to turn. There's a point where this becomes, the practice in general is not possible. If you look at the case of drug addicts on the street, they've been living like this for years. A frantic drug addict with withdrawal symptoms and all that, they're not just going to be able to start practicing. They're going to sit and meditate. They have no mindfulness left in them. So it's like a doctor with a patient who has an eating disorder. You can't just tell them to stop eating and do something else instead. Doctors and psychiatrists often use pills for that. They need strong medications. They don't have the time to work on this person with years of like counseling and like communication therapy. So a pill is the likely sedative. And if someone is violent and angry, a doctor doesn't have 5 years to talk them down, right? They give them a pill, or if it's ADD, ADHD. And that's how we like it too, because that's the pharmaceutical industry and the health industry that's their intention is to make money for the most part, at least in conventional medicine. So with billions of people, we don't have the resources for everyone to be a monk. It would have to be, that would need to be part of the culture, and it's not, because spirituality and religion is a minority culture. It's not popular anymore to be religious. We don't really have heretics and non-believers anymore, because that's the majority of people. It's normalized. So most people aren't willing to practice this sort of thing. But what is kind of interesting is many meditators say that they wouldn't have started meditation if they hadn't had drug experiences at first. So these are more beneficial experiences, usually with herbal hallucinogenic natural drugs like mushrooms and different forms of DMT. And these are for people who have taken drugs as a recreational thing. They weren't so much they weren't drug addicts. These are just recreational drugs. And so in that case, those substances were able to give them a glimpse into different states of consciousness and different dimensions. And it proved to them that reality just isn't just one flat, three-dimensional plane. It suddenly reveals all these layers and colors to you. And so people appear differently to those who have these experiences. What you say and do or how you spend your life suddenly provides a strange kind of insight. Everything is presented in an unfamiliar light. That usual storyline of your life is interrupted. A mushroom trip can really, it just completely flips your perspective. Some people say that they're able to get out of their usual sort of zone that they're in, their perspective, their mundane, ordinary zone, and look at their life from a distance, have a greater perspective on it, like a clean slate, or looking at a city from a big hill. You can see the point of it, the purpose, and you can see where things are going, where you're going. So it's a totally different way of seeing, and it's almost always beneficial. It's not completely delusional. People are getting real psychic insights with these plants. These plants are actually just they're expanding their connection with their true consciousness. Their pituitary and pineal glands are activating, and that's allowing them to perceive consciously. And there are yet still monks that clarify that this is not meditation, but, because the awareness isn't always there. But what it is, essentially, is insight. And it is a major shift in perspective, and is a true one usually, because it's intuitive. But you can't necessarily get the same effect from a drug the way that conventional meditation does. Not all the time, at least. And it's not good to rely on these things, right? Because again, these are external things. External supplements. So meditation is a form of training, because you need to be able to do this yourself. You need to control your mind. Can't get those drugs to do that for you. This requires systematic and repeated and persistent effort. And the goal is you have to train your mind to exceed the normal structures of ordinary humans. And you have to give your mind that exercise to see if it can handle it. Because what we are as a species, we are truly animals. We are mammals, and we have the mechanical, we have the instinctual mammalian or animal mind. This is not truly human. A real human is in a super normal state. They don't have a subconsciousness like we do. So, for example, now on these exercises, if you try to watch your breath without forgetting that you're doing this, just after 3 breaths, for example, you can use a counting exercise for this. And people might count their exhalations, breathe in, then count 1. You try not to wander or lose your count. People will go up to 5, and then actually this practice, you go up to 5 and then start again. And in some schools, they don't let you count to 100 because it would just be something to do. The certain schools keep it to 5, So you're not going anywhere. You're just moving in a small circle. And you see how long you can do this, go on like this before the counts drop. So that counting actually reveals when you've drifted away. Because in fact, the mindfulness of an average person is often so poor that they don't even realize when they've lost their mindfulness, their awareness. So when people are asked at the end of an hour how much time they were actually present, they often can't give an accurate answer. Like when they lost awareness, when they got distracted, or how long they were concentrated for. So a lot of people lack the ability to describe their internal state because we are not really paying attention, surprisingly, most of the time. And this is partially why mind readers and fortune tellers and horoscopes are so convincing, because people actually don't realize who they are completely. We're not aware of some of the things that we're saying and doing and thinking. There is a lot of self-ignorance that people, especially essentially, stagger through life, blind to the inner nature, or to whatever, or even just their ordinary nature. Some people are not really aware of that either. Like someone who doesn't realize they're an introvert, and yet when you bring it up, maybe they start to consider that, oh, they're actually very quiet all the time. They never make statements. They never impose their idea. They don't ask questions. They just reply to people, and they don't realize they're like this. Or opposite, maybe they don't realize they're an extrovert, or they talk too much and they have no filter. And they're constantly interrupting you. Every time you start saying something, they say, oh, this and that, but then I think of this, but then that reminds me of this, and they're just talking over you constantly, and they don't even realize they're doing that. And a lot of people don't. So, to remedy this, to balance these traits out, it's all a matter of taming the mind and watching it. And this is described in the ox herding pictures of Oriental art and in Zen. They have these series of ancient paintings about like showing ox herding. And you see there's a search for an ox, and it starts off with, I guess the guy is by himself and he's wandering on a field, and then he finds the ox somewhere, and then he has to harness it. So the ox represents, this is the Zen version of the Tibetan monkey, elephant mindfulness or shamatha analogy, the 9 stages of shamatha, where the monk needs to control the monkey mind, I think with some kind of a hook or a rope. And then the monkey mind needs to go on to the elephant, which is the stubbornness and the bestial nature. And all of that has to be hooked and controlled. So same idea. And the ox represents your mind. It's an animal nature. We have instinct. We have animal instinct. That has to be controlled. It's heavy and stubborn. It doesn't want to change, and it wanders around aimlessly. So in the spiritual training, you start by searching your own mind because it's lost and wandering. It's not a common analogy we use today. I mean, nobody herds oxen anymore, at least not in the West. But we have cow ranges, cattle. That's similar. So the mind is always on the range, and we have to bring it in. We're like the farmer. We have the ownership of the farmland, of the range, and we got to get it under control. And so we have to bring the oxen in and the cattle in. First thing is we find it, right? Yep, you have to know where it is first. You can't just bring it in. It's somewhere there. It's somewhere out there. The mind is somewhere else, wandering all the time, right? So we catch a glimpse of it, then we catch up to it. We put, in the case of the oxen analogy, you put the ring through its nose, which is the ring's attached to a rope, and that's like the tether or the, what's it called? A leash. And eventually, the man in these paintings sits on the back of the ox. And finally, both the man and the ox disappear. So the Buddha also talked about putting a ring through the nose. And this is very similar to breath meditation. You bring the mind to the tip of the nose, just like a clip used to control an ox. If the mind is used to being out on the range, it will break the cord and bolt. So he's saying here, you can't just tie it to a post immediately. Instead, you put it in a corral first. So if you can't keep the mind at the tip of your nose, you ask it to stay within a certain boundary, the boundaries of your body. So instead of focusing on the nose, maybe you just focus on different parts of your body at first. It's a broader area. So you might, this could just be in the form of walking meditation. But I like to consider this as being present in the physical world, because I find people are visual, and I think it's quite easy to just focus on the present visual stimulation while you're aware, self-aware, through walking meditation or any time of the day, basically. But walking is pretty helpful because it has some movement to it, and you're not completely still in a room where your mind can just wander into its thoughts. You have some visual stimulation, but not too much like a movie. So you might do a walking meditation and ask if you can stay present with that sensation of walking and the trees going by and your breath and you being there, that awareness. So it's a much bigger field of attention, and I think it's much less demanding than watching your breath or your nose. So you give your mind some spaciousness, but not too much. It's a contained area until it's used to being restrained this way. And some monk notice this with people living on the streets. Even if they are taken into a shelter, they often end up back outside because they cannot be contained. Their minds are too wild. And however, that isn't freedom. And that's something you have to become aware about. An untrained mind is wild and free in one sense. It can do whatever it wants. When you have an untrained mind, you can do whatever you want. You can think about whatever you want and pursue any sensation. But that is never free, because this whole point is addressing that endless pursuit in things, outside things, endless activity of the mind, endless busyness. And when people talk about freedom, they are ultimately not free. They're not talking about real freedom, because they're still part of, right, when you have the freedom of retirement and you can do whatever you want, you're still under the influence of the busy mind. And you will always pursue things that you want to do, and you'll be anxious and unsettled when there is nothing to do. So you find freedom through discipline at first. It requires discipline to get to the place of real freedom, right? The jhanas and samadhi, the unconditioned state. To get there, you need mind control. If you control the mind to get into a place of concentration, it will do that. It will concentrate for you by itself, effortlessly. This is the natural state of the mind, the consciousness. just takes some process to get there. So only at the highest levels of training are you actually free. That's why for most people, freedom just means at our level to do whatever we want. But for the trained mind, it's the freedom from having to do things. Freedom from having that urge to do things, to be moving all the time. So agitation and restlessness and desire are it's like a cruel master. And we are the servant who's never given a moment's rest. The master's always shouting at us, go get this and go do this and go get that. Now do this. Now get that. And us as a servant to our mind, we are servants to our minds. We never get a break. Our minds are always demanding something from us. So that's what that inner agitation is like. It's that inner compulsion. So if we finally find some peace and lose that driven feeling, then we'll know true freedom. It's like being released from indentured service to a bad master. And it's a great accomplishment to find peace. People often talk about love and peace. I mean, especially in the time of the boomer ages, the hippies that was the highest value for them, was love and peace. It was a movement. It was like the beginning of the love revolution. And, but some monks noticed that ordinary people are actually bored by this. We don't really want peace in the sense of stillness. There are neighborhoods where people are constantly looking for friction and trouble. So the idea of peace is actually kind of worrisome for people. If they aren't fighting for someone else, then they have to face their own minds, which is, as I said, boring and just promotes anxiety. So, and people actually feel a sense of relief when there is drama or there's something to do. It takes away from your own problems or your own, in some cases, your own sense of meaninglessness in your boring life. Which is unfortunate that people have that, but when they have the luxury to not do very much, then they feel that there's not much purpose. The Buddha compared this to lepers who burn their skin with hot coals, because the disease kills the nerves, right? So the intense heat is the only way they can feel anything at all. It actually feels good to them. And similarly, a person in constant conflict is just seeking sensations because they can't settle. They want something to do. They don't want to be still. So all that shouting and rage is just a way to avoid being alone with themselves. And you see this in prisons. Someone might be a lot to handle, just a heck raiser, constantly getting into trouble. So they're finally put into solitary confinement, and you watch what happens to them. They cannot handle it. They shout for attention and become self-destructive, and you see people like banging their heads around. And, because being alone is with an out of control mind is painfully restless for them. It's restless and they want attention and they're not getting it. Now imagine the opposite. As you train yourself emotionally for this superior emotion, supra-sensible or conscious emotion, it's not just intellectual. You develop lucidity and presence. Your every interaction becomes attentive and patient and full of goodwill. Even if you encounter someone who's misdirected, it's more like coming across a puppy. You aren't surprised when a puppy runs around or makes a mess. You're not worried by it. You were expecting it. You speak kindly to them and you're patient. You recognize the untrained mind in others. You understand that that's their nature. It's the ordinary, it's the common nature of people. And it leads you to staying calm and being able to stay positive in interactions rather than becoming very functional and frictional with them, so that you can get away from your own distraction. Your own problems. And even when someone else is in trouble, or it has a problem with you or someone, you don't have to participate. At least, or when they're in trouble, you're helping them, not because you have to get away from your own problems, but because it's just the right thing to do. It's nice to help people. You don't have anything in your own life to run away from. There's nothing to run away from. There are, as I mentioned, old people and some Aboriginal groups and people can sit still for hours, doing almost nothing except watching the sunset in the evening, or just watching the sun go down even from the afternoon, knitting the entire time, and they seem pretty content. It's opposite to the hyperactive modern millennials and Generation Zs or whatever they are, urban people who are totally dependent on constant activity. I work with a guy in a kitchen, and there's so many guys I meet who, or in any kind of job, these guys I meet who just can't stay sane without music going on. They have to have the music on. They say, "Oh, turn the music off. I'm losing my groove here. I'm losing." I don't know. Again, I don't know what word to use, but they get anxious and it throws them off. That's what they say. It's throwing me off, man. You gotta put the music back on. Yeah. So, and or other times it's just really boring for them. Right. There was another guy who I clean with, and we're always driving together, and he has to have the music on. Doesn't like that. If he's in my car, I gotta put the music on. He always has the music on in his car. So we're dependent on that noise, background chatter. But for those peaceful people out there and groups, those people who are kind of used to being in quietude, the good kind, they are truly in control of their mind, at least a little bit more so than the average person. Are they just conditioned by a quiet environment? I don't think so. I think it's a form of innocence. Because like a child, before too many thoughts have been stirred up when we get older. But when you're a young kid, they're very simple. You didn't think about things all the time. You didn't have to. And you're used to that. Now, we all come from Aboriginal roots in some form or another. So it's not just the indigenous people who can continue to live simply, and like they did in their tribes and things like that. Now our genetic structures were built for that natural way of living. We all have this in small clans and tribes in the forests. So how did the chaotic culture grow out of that? If those quiet states were better, why are we here? It happened because those peaceful states weren't, they gradually became less and less based on wisdom. We, of course, with Christianity in the West, we lost the teaching very dramatically after a few hundred years of that. It came as it progressed into common denominations after the Gnostic period. After the first couple hundred years, Christianity really changed dramatically. So the wisdom was different. We had different roots for how we should live. And this just happens everywhere eventually for any civilization or planet. Is generally things succumb to entropy over time. But basically there's a time we reach where you're not self-informed anymore. And we forget why we were in that piece to begin with, because the teachings changed too much. So the well-being was dependent on that well-being of being in peace and stillness. It's dependent on the social structure. In this case, I'm referring to the old tribal structures, village structures. And when that structure and infrastructure was interrupted, or when it is interrupted, we don't have a good way to sustain ourselves. We'll just get tempted by all the desires, and the desires will take over, and then our lives and culture will be built around desire. And that's why things get so chaotic, because we have a lot of desires. Advertisements everywhere to feed our desires, to tempt us, and more people coming in. We don't have limits to how big cities can be, or how big. Well, we have to start making limits to how many children you can have in a city or in a country. That sort of thing. And the culture is based on desire, not peace or selflessness. So we lose the virtues when you lose the teaching. And this is why interrupted cultures fall apart. People become prone to addiction because being unconscious at this point feels better than being awake and present. So when a person's consciousness is disturbed, they often seek what is called vibhava tanha, which is the thirst for annihilation, the thirst for things to stop existing, the thirst for so this is the thirst for non-existence or death or the cessation of something. And people famously use drugs and alcohol to take their minds off of their problems in life, depending on their personality, whatever they choose, right? Various forms of escape. One way to escape yourself is to seek adventure. You might take a drug to enhance that excitement. So that is bhava tanha. Sorry, I'm getting confused here. So one is to there's a desire to stop existing, a death wish. That's vibhava tanha. And people, sleep in for this. When they're depressed, they sleep in. They don't want to get up and go on with their day, live their lives. And they drink to fall unconscious. And then there's the opposite of this, which is to seek adventure. And in whatever form, not just traveling, but like in drugs, excitement, usually in stimulants. So this is simply bhava tana. So there's vibhava tana and bhava tana. The thirst for life, the thirst for sensation, more experiences. So, so it's usually the accelerants, stimulants that they take, anything interesting, traveling, and just constantly doing things to make the world more intense for them. The opposite types, they drink to pass out. And they aren't looking for adventure. They want to end their awareness. So there's the clinging to life and the desperate clinging to life and the strong urge to end experience, to end life. And these aren't just Freudian ideas. These are basic drives described in Buddhism, right? Long before the West were familiar with them. One drive is toward death. One drive is toward life or experience. And some people might even do dangerous things, and they don't care anymore about their life. So you see that they're drinking excessively and doing the drugs, and they're basically like they're on the verge to overdosing, right? They don't care anymore. Maybe they're not trying to fall unconscious, but whatever they're doing, like they don't care. So risking their lives in different ways, walking on the street really slowly with all these cars zooming by and not really concerned about what's going to happen, what could happen to them. And then there's a point where, and then these people, of course, attempt suicide too in certain cases. And then in the opposite extreme, it's like someone going on a desperate adventures and dangling off cliffs without ropes, just to feel alive. So the ordinary life is unbearable. As I said, constantly listening to music, can't be with their own thoughts, can't stand still, constant stimulation. Their drug might be anything that lets them party for days straight. And most people, however, settle for sensory addictions. So this is the majority of people. We are eating too much and finishing, binging on snacks and candies, binging in video games and snacks, and it can appear very refined and sophisticated, or as like a cultured person, someone who has the luxury to go to banquets and dinners all the time and eat out all the time and go to concerts, just constantly doing interesting, nice things, high-end restaurants, expensive shopping. They might have sophisticated taste, but it's all about seeing and hearing and just keeping yourself busy and indulgent. Just pursuing the sensory input. There's different levels to it and expressions, but it's all sensory based. It's higher in the thinking traditions of philosophy, but still, that's thinking. So in the forest tradition of Theravada, they call this kamma, not to be mistaken for the kamma word they use when referring to karma, but this is kamma with one M, not two M's. And it's the addiction to, as I said, it's to senses, sensory experience. This is one of the most powerful drives. We seek relief from life by keeping score. And they might say they've been to 17 famous restaurants. We drank specific wines and went to Paris or went to Italy and heard the symphony and met so-and-so, had an affair with so-and-so. These are all just grand investments to escape from existential reality. This is kamma, the thirst for sensation. In this case, the person isn't necessarily clinging to life, but they aren't looking for death either. So clinging to life is its own problem. There's a distinction here. If you're desperate to stay alive, then anything that threatens your existence becomes terrifying. You live in fear of the inevitable. And this strategy is destined to fail because eventually everything does end, your life and everyone else's. But trying to cancel yourself out is also not helpful. It's not satisfactory. People hope that death will solve their problem. If you have a materialistic view, you think it ends there. But from a Buddhist perspective, of course, it doesn't. Death is not the cure for suffering. Death doesn't lead to that. It only leads to rebirth, perpetual life. Only wisdom is really the answer. And if you think about this a lot, for a society that tries to legalize euthanasia, medically assisted suicide, it's not a good situation we're in. You might understand it for someone who is irrecoverably sick and suffering a lot. But, there are also people out there with these new views where these are old people who are healthy and, they are considering that they might grow weak and sick and they should commit to the euthanasia practice before things get too painful for them. And so this is a new philosophy because of this practice. They think maybe they should do it now before they start experiencing dementia, before they're at a point where they can't make their own decisions. They're too out of it. So they're worried that if they wait too long, things will become too difficult and they won't even have that option anymore, maybe. These are very detrimental ideas and confusing. This is very confusing without the grounding of a religious point of view or a moralistic point of view. You don't get past the problem this way, really. People just say that they want everything to end. And, in some sense, for annihilationists, yes, everything does end. When you end your life, things could theoretically end, but it will not be, philosophically speaking here, it won't be an experience for you. You can't experience death and relief from death after you're dead. You can't, from an annihilationist point of view, you can't end your life, stop existing and go, oh, okay, that's great. Finally, now I'm free. I can just relax here. No, because you're done. You don't exist. You can't experience that death. It will just completely cessate everything. You won't experience the relief. You just won't experience anything. So that's a philosophical take on it. But I guess for people who are suffering, they're not too concerned about that because they just want things to just end. But, you'll never have that moment of relief that way. Things just end, right? It's like going in for a surgery. Maybe they give you, they put the injection in you for the anesthesia. And next thing you know, you're back in bed. Someone asks you how you are. And then you ask when the operation starts, only to find out that actually it's over. There's no experience at all of that. Or we want to put people out of the misery, of course. But it's the living people who experience that. You put something out of the misery and then everything ends for them, per se. but we are the ones who are not miserable too. We get the relief because we're still alive. We feel better for them. We're going that way. We don't have to watch them suffering anymore. So any thoughtful person who processes this, like Wittgenstein, he realized this idea. For Christians, heaven happens after death. But he realized that you can't experience annihilationism because that is the end of experiences completely. Now, so again, Christians, heaven happens after death. For Buddhists, heaven is a dimension. It's a state of mind, and you live in heaven by training yourself and evolving yourself to belong there vibrationally. Because the work is always psychological, then if you train your mind to be in the right psychological state, then of course the body is just a vehicle. Once that breaks apart, then the mind will stay where it is. It will just go where it belongs. And you've been training for Nibbana this whole time, so it will stay there when you die. It's not a place that you are expecting after death. It doesn't work like that. You can't just suddenly step into another stage of evolution. You have to progressively do this. And you can check along the way in meditation to see how you've progressed. It's confirmable as you're alive. So you must do this when you're alive. It's not something that waits for you until death. You have to be free from life while you're still living in life. And it's very difficult. It involves dissolving the person you think you are, dissolving the conditions, dissolving the sense of self, getting rid of all the clutter. And people get defensive sometimes when they hear about this, being free from desire. Well, they want all their desires to be fulfilled, not removed. It's like being in university. You might have immense pressure on you. No, you have to get rid of the sense of who you are, and you have to stop worrying about other people's opinions, because even though you think you have to be a certain way, you think you have to be successful, you have to have a job and all that, a career, you have to be a professional, make money. This goes against what happiness really is, right? So you have to be very confident in yourself, very independent, because people will not understand. They won't agree with you. They think you're not making anything of yourself. You're wasting your life, but you have to not succumb to that. You have to be independent. This is the way. The true success and happiness is the cessation of the pursuit of desire. That's how, and people, abandoning that idea feels like they're killing themselves. Well, a part of themselves are dying. The false self is dying. Some people fake their own deaths to escape from other people's opinions. They arrange it so everyone thinks they're gone, so that they can finally be themselves without living up to expectations. There was an Australian politician who swam into the sea, and he disappeared for years after. He went somewhere after that, but he was presumed dead, only to be turned up in Europe somewhere like 10 years later with a new life. But instead of faking your physical death, meditation helps you realize that your identity is just a story that you tell yourself. It's a made-up concept. It's not really real. So you don't want the pressure from society. The Buddha had this pressure to live up to expectation too. In the scriptures, he was a prince and a future king. But he understood the meaninglessness of it. He saw past it. He knew it was frivolous existence. He had to terminate his old life, his old sense of self, his title as the prince, and so he just disappeared one night. He had to leave behind his marriage and his newborn child. So he escaped the palace and went into the forest for a while and practiced because he needed to know. He wanted to know if there was anything truly meaningful in this, meaningful in life. If there's more meaning to just pursuing these repetitive, cyclic, and impermanent cycles of indulgence, basically. Impermanent cycles of gaining and indulging and enjoying and losing things. Which brings me to the second point of this lecture, which is not just mind control, but finding purpose. Once you successfully placed yourself, you've learned to successfully place yourself in that state of stillness and emptiness. Is there anything there beyond the chatter and the noise